Good morning, afternoon, and welcome to the World Affairs Council of Washington. My name is Heidi Shoup, and for those of you who are new, and there are some here today, welcome. I'm the Executive Director of the Council, and we're just starting another year that's, I think, going to be full of some very interesting programs. Coming up soon will be on Thursday, January 31st, we have a panel, Kosovo, a new East-West crisis. Several speakers will be talking about what looks like a Kosovo Declaration of Independence this month. And then on Thursday, February 7th, we have a very special event. The former President of Mexico, Vicente Fox, will be speaking on U.S.-Mexico relations, challenges for the next president. That will be a luncheon address, and it will be at the J.W. Marriott Grand Ballroom here in Washington. And then for much future planning, far future planning, on March 3rd, we will have our next embassy event at the Embassy of Sri Lanka. So we'll have more information about that shortly. Our guest today is Glenn Kessler, currently a diplomatic correspondent for the Washington Post, and he continues to report on the formulation and implementation of U.S. foreign policy through agencies such as the White House and the State Department. In 1998, he joined the Post as national business editor and switched to reporting in 2002 to cover domestic economic policy and the Bush administration's tax cut proposal. Prior to joining the Post, he worked for 11 years as a reporter for Newsday and led that paper's coverage of the 1996 election. He has also been a recipient of numerous awards, including 2 shared Pulitzer Prizes. He received a master's degree in international affairs from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in European history from Brown. Today he will be sharing with us remarks on his just-released book on Condoleezza Rice. Please join me in welcoming Glenn Kessler.
Thank you very much. Glad you could brave some of the bad weather we have here to come here today. Let me begin with a story that, for me, defines the essence of Condoleezza Rice's style as Secretary of State. In July 2004, her final year as National Security Advisor, she traveled to Beijing and had a difficult conversation with State Councilor Tang Zaijuan, one of China's most senior officials. She had been allotted 1 hour for her meeting with Tang, and then she was scheduled to meet with President Hu Jintao. But Tang launched into an angry blast at the administration's handling of Taiwan, speaking in a monologue that lasted for nearly 55 minutes. Finally, he paused. "I've spoken too long," Tang said in mock apology. "Yes, you've talked too long," Rice replied with a sharpness that seemed to surprise Tang. She used the remaining 5 minutes to briefly and pointedly dissect his arguments before marching out of the room. 8 months later, Condoleezza Rice was Secretary of State, and she was planning her first trip to Asia. This time, it was time to make Tang sweat. Every time someone tried to insert a meeting with Tang on her schedule, Rice knocked it off. "Not enough time for meetings," he said. The Chinese government, particularly the embassy in Washington, became apoplectic. So did many Asia hands at the State Department. Rice was scheduled to meet with the foreign minister, but in the Chinese system, the state counselor outranked the foreign minister, so if Tang would lose face if Rice met with the foreign minister, but not with him. But Rice was firm. There was no time for Tang. A meeting with Tang was still not on Rice's schedule when her plane landed in Beijing. After she entered her hotel suite, she unexpectedly received a vast smorgasbord of Chinese sweets, fruit, and wine. "Compliments of State Councilor Tang," read the little card that came with the food. As Rice and her aides began to devour the luscious delicacies, she began to muse out loud, knowing full well that every word she uttered was being recorded by hidden Chinese listening devices. "What do you think?" she asked her aides. "Should I see him?" A meeting was finally scheduled, and State Councilor Tang turned out to be extremely interested and solicitous to hear Rice's views. As you can see, Rice has an instinct for the jugular. In public, she is almost always gracious and charming. Behind closed doors, she can be tough and direct, shocking foreign diplomats into action because they assume her words reflect the views of her very close friend, the President of the United States. I give many examples of Rice's style in my book, The Confidant, Condoleezza Rice and the Creation of the Bush Legacy. In the book, I take readers inside meetings that Rice has had with foreign diplomats, the President, and with her staff. On one level, I think it will appeal to foreign policy specialists, because many of these details have never been revealed before. But I also intended the book to interest readers who know little about foreign policy, but who want to understand what has happened the last 7 years. I also sketched a personality portrait of the Secretary of State with previously unseen moments from her life. Finally, I described the interplay between reporters and this administration. For instance, I show how Rice and her staff worked hard at the beginning of her term as Secretary of State to overcome her image as a weak national security advisor in order to create the illusion of a powerful diplomat who might even have presidential aspirations. In my book, I revealed that one of her top aides even slipped a note to a sympathetic journalist to ask a question about whether she would be interested in running for president. This helped fan the speculation about her presidential aspirations. It was a brilliant strategy that worked effectively well, a textbook case in political image-making that to this day continues to give Rice the highest approval ratings of any major administration official. My goal throughout the book was to be clear-eyed and balanced. It is mostly a work of reportage, but I also make some judgments about Rice, what she has done right, what she's done wrong. I think the reporting in the book backs up those judgments, though I realize some of these conclusions have been painful to people in the administration. The President's unflagging support is crucial to Rice's impact overseas. Colin Powell did not have the trust of the President, so foreign officials told me they were never quite sure if Powell was selling U.S. policy or seeking allies for policy battles back home. When Rice became Secretary, Bush paved the way for influence overseas by pointedly telling foreign leaders when they came to the White House, to the Oval Office, "Miss Rice is like my sister." Those are powerful words coming from the President of the United States. Bush reinforced the message at home, telling U.S. diplomats at one point that he and Rice are, quote, "completely in sync. When she speaks, you know she is speaking for me." Rice works hard to keep up that connection with Bush now that she is no longer in the White House. If a meeting is not planned that day, she will call him in the morning to check in. Usually on weekends, she'll call him on Saturday or Sunday to discuss the week, and every night she sends him a private note describing the diplomatic issues she confronted that day, essentially a foreign policy version of the intelligence and military briefings that the President receives every day. In many ways, the President is the idea generator in a relationship. Before entering the Bush administration 7 years ago, Rice was known as a foreign policy realist. You deal with states as they are. Now she has adopted wholeheartedly the President's nostrum that the characters of states matter, and that it is important to change the nature of those states in order to bring peace and security to the globe. Rice's close relationship with the President, plus her lack of family obligations, has freed her to become the most traveled Secretary of State since Henry Kissinger, making a strong contrast to Colin Powell, who was the least traveled Secretary of State in 3 decades. Rice is also in many ways a more skillful one-on-one diplomat than Powell. She's brought new vigor to U.S. diplomacy, quickly repairing relations with Europe and securing a groundbreaking nuclear deal, still in the works, with India just months after she took the helm of the State Department. However, I argue in my book that her options and opportunities as Secretary of State are limited by one deeply ironic fact. She was one of the weakest national security advisors in U.S. history. Her inexperience and her mistakes in that job have just shaped the world and colored the choices she faces as Secretary of State. The invasion of Iraq, the missed opportunities with Iran, the breach in relations with Europe, the North Korean nuclear breakout, the creation of secret CIA prisons in Europe, the failure to bolster Palestinian democracy. All of these problems were the direct result of decisions that she helped shape in the White House. Now, as Secretary of State, she has tried mightily, and with limited success, to unravel the Gordian knots that she tied in the first term. For instance, let's look at Israel and the Palestinian territories. To some extent, it is unfair to blame American officials for the failures of Israelis and Palestinians. But the United States plays a critical role in managing the conflict. The Bush administration is disengaged at critical moments and often appeared to tilt too strongly towards Israel, leaving intense anger in the Arab world at U.S. policy. The administration's stated goal is to build Palestinian institutions and to remove leaders with terrorist links. Yet, as the result of U.S. policies, the Hamas militant group won Palestinian elections and eventually took over Gaza, leaving the Palestinian Authority a shell on the verge of collapse. Now, President Bush came into office highly skeptical of President Clinton's sustained engagement in the peace process.